Let's see the deployment today. So we have our environment. We have servers. We were able to start servers on multiple boxes. The domain is spread across 2 boxes now. So basically, you have the entire infrastructure ready. Now, what we are expected to do is to bring in an application on top of it. That's the reason we have created this entire infrastructure, isn't it? So we wanted to have our application on multiple managed servers so that it can be accessed and the load can be distributed. Now, before we go into deployment, we'll see some very generic concepts of Java, how a Java package is actually bundled, what are the contents of a package, what are the various files that can be deployed, all the generics of Java, the very basic fundamentals of Java. Then we will actually get into deployment. Why? Because this is it's nice to know knowledge of Java. So the fundamentals of Java basically, if you look at it, normally when you write a code, a Java developer, when they write the code, they basically look at you can use any of the tools that they will be using, like Eclipse or GDeveloper, or you can practically start writing Java code on a notepad also. So let's say you start writing the notepad. Now a developer usually writes the code in what is called a .java program. Let me just open it. Can you guys put yourself on mute, please? Okay, so this is what a developer usually does. Let's say they open up a notepad and write a Java code. Once you write the Java code, you save it into what is called a .java file. So let's say here you have a file, hello world.java. Alright, you have, let's say you are writing a code, hello world.java. That's what you stored it. You're a developer. Now once this code is developed, or once this code is saved, this code gets compiled using a Java compiler. So usually a Java compiler is something like this, Java C or Javac. It will be, this command will be found in the same directory as your Java command, so under Java home bin. So using this compiler, you're going to write this. Alright, your Java code gets compiled to what is called a bytecode. So once the compilation is done, alright, Java, you will get what is called a class file. So here you are getting hello world dot class. This is what you got right after the compilation. Now this class file is what is known as a popular bytecode, which is platform independent. So here if you say this is the bytecode. Now all that we have to do to execute this bytecode is run a JVM using your Java command, Java hello world. You don't have to give the dot class. So this is how you execute a class. So this is a very fundamentals of Java program, means the hello world program. So what we are doing essentially here is You're writing the code first of all right? That code will be saved into files like .java files. So the developer on his desktop is writing this code using some kind of tool. A notepad is a very basic way, or a better way is to use a tool like Eclipse or JDeveloper. Now once the code is written, the code gets compiled using a compiler. This after the code is compiled, you will get a class file. This is your Java program. Now this code can be taken to any location, any system, and can be executed. Now to execute this code, we're going to need a JVM. Now these are the JVMs that we have created. So if you see our environment that we have created one box was this, another box was this. So we had our environment like 192, 168, 128. 6 was the first one. Then we extended it to another box. 192, 168, 128. I think it's 11 or 23. Let's say 3, I think it is. Then we have an admin server here, couple of managed servers on the first box, and couple of managed servers on second box. All these are JVMs. This is what you have created. What you are trying to do on these JVMs, on all the JVMs, you are trying to run a program, hello world. Or what you've been doing so far is you are running a program called WebLogic server. So if you take for example, what you are running is Java WebLogic.server. This is what we will see when you do a ps-ef grep for Java. Now this JVM that we have created, these JVMs, all admin servers, managed server, everything, they are running a big Java program called WebLogic.server. This Java program allows a part 2 to be embedded to it, which is going to be our application that we'll deploy today. So now look at this one. Now in this entire thing, we said you write the code, store it into .java file, you compile it using Java compiler, you will get a .class file, which is a bytecode. Now this bytecode is platform independent. Then you are running that bytecode on a JVM. Now the question is JVM independent of platform or it's not? Is JVM independent or dependent on the platform? You need to answer that question. Is JVM independent or dependent? Dependent. That's correct. JVM is dependent. It's the bytecode that is independent, which means you can have your developer develop the bytecode on a Windows desktop. You can bring it to a Unix system where you have a JVM already running and then actually run it on that JVM. Just hold on a minute, I'll open that. Right. So what we are looking at here is the Java program or the JVM itself is dependent. So when you install JVM on Unix, you have a different installer. When you install JVM on Windows, you have a different installer. But once that installation is done, the hello world program, which is the bytecode, is same. That can be executed anywhere, that can be compiled anywhere. So here the JVM is the one that basically makes your Java independent of the platform. Now in our case, what we are doing is you are running a big class called weblogic.server on a JVM that we have installed. So all our machines or all our managed servers are basically JVMs, and those JVMs, any JVM we use to run the Java code. So here, if you take for example a big enterprise program, an enterprise program is nothing but a large bundle of classes. Now if you observe, what we have done is we have written a program, hello world, and we have compiled it, then we are running that class that we got out of compilation. So this is what we are running, but we don't usually give a dot class. It means a dot class. Dot class is the compiled code. Now if you take an enterprise application, it's pretty similar to a simple dot class file, but instead of having a very simplistic one dot class file, an enterprise application has large number of classes. For example, if you take a banking application, which is an online banking application or something. Now the online banking application will have a large number of classes. Now when you have a large number of classes, you will bundle them together so that it's easy to manage transfer from one location to other location. And even that enterprise application usually has a front end. Alright, this is a front end, let's say. Alright, then there is a back end. Back end is where the code gets executed. Front end is something that presented to the user. For example, if you take a banking application, when you log into your bank account, you will see, let's say you are trying to do a fund transfer. Now when you are doing fund transfer, then you will be asked what's the account you want to transfer the funds to, what is the amount you want to transfer, when you want to transfer, all that stuff. That is front end, where the user sees the application. Now once you give those details, the code gets executed on the back end, which means do you have that balance or not, how to connect to the gateway, do the transfer, give you a confirmation number, all that thing is a back end code. Now normally an enterprise application will have both front end and back end, but because of the nature of their work, front end is usually the presentation part. That's how it will be shown to the user. Back end is where the execution happens. Now these two areas get developed in two different technologies of Java. So if you take a front end, usually you see servlets. Servlets is a programming, GSPs for that matter. So you might have GSPs. These are the two major technologies where the front end gets executed: Java server pages and servlets. So anything that is presented to the end user usually gets developed in these two technologies. You don't have to worry internals of those technologies. Let's just say a Java developer who knows these two technologies will be able to develop front end. The same way, anything that is back end or the business logic usually gets written in EasyBeans, enterprise Java beans. There are lots of types of Java beans, then you don't have to worry about the types of Java beans. But a backend logic gets executed in EasyBeans. So here, when you're developing an application, a large application, you have these two components. One is the front end, other one is the back end. So the combination of these two things is what you're calling an enterprise application. So here if you say front end and back end. Now you have large number of classes for front end, the same large number of classes on back end. Now because you have a large number of classes, you want to bundle them. When you bundle all the front-end related classes, you will call it a var file or a web archive, because these are web technologies that you are using. JSPs and servlets are called web technologies because they are web technology. Means web technologies are nothing but web-based technologies. That's what they used to be called earlier. Web-based is basically, presentation layer. That's where the web-based comes into picture. So all the classes that you developed using these JSPs and serverless technologies, if you bundle them together, you got a web archive or a var file. And the same way, anything that is developed in EasyBees, and if you bundle such classes, they are called jar files, Java archives. Now, when you run an enterprise application, means a large application like banking application, you need both front end and back end. Now, obviously, you're going to combine both of them together. Alright, so when you combine both of them together, you're going to get what is called an enterprise archive. So you're going to get this. Alright, so this is usually an AR file. It's gone. It's gone. So you have a front end, you have a back end. The front end is usually var files. The back end is usually jar files. You combine them, you get a AR file, an enterprise archive. So any enterprise archive usually will have a front end and then a back end, which is on the. Something is wrong with this. I think I'm erasing it. Okay, so basically, now from a developer, when you get the code, you will get it in bundles. You'll get bundles of vars, you will get bundles of jars, you can get bundles of ER files. There are a couple of other types of bundles. Alright, so you have got vars, then you got AR files, then you got another thing called a RAR file, a resource archive. Apart from that, you will also, as I told you, you will also might get jars. These are the three types of archives, or four types. Out of these four, jars are not directly allowed to be deployed to WebLogic. Vars, ERs and RARs can be directly deployed to WebLogic. So a developer can give you a var file, an AR file and a RAR file. They can't give you a jar file, it cannot be deployed directly, but there are ways of doing the deployment. Probably we'll see them towards the end of our deployment session, but in general you will get these three types of files, archives from a developer. Web archive, which is usually a front end. An enterprise archive, as we know, is vars plus jars. A RAR is a resource archive. Usually a resource archive is an application. Again, all these are Java applications. This Java application will allow you to connect to a legacy system, something like mainframes. So when you want to connect from a Java application to another backend legacy system, you will usually use a connector. That connector gets developed and bundled into a RAR file, resource archive. So vars are front ends, EARs are usually front ends plus back ends, or mostly back ends. RARs are connectors, jars are purely back end. So you will get one of these three for deployments. Now when you get those three, how do we deploy? That's what our concern is at this point of time. Alright, so before we go in there further, I'm going to show you quickly how it looks like inside. So when you extract a var file, how does it look like? So for that one, I'm going to take a sample application and the corresponding vars and ARs from that application. And then we're going to extract that application, see the structure of those files. Then we will also use the same application for our deployment. Alright, so here we're talking about the same stuff here. Usually class files are bundled into jar files. Jar plus classes plus web XML is var. var files plus web.xml is ER. We'll come there here to these questions. What can be deployed? You can deploy vars, ERs, rars to WebLogic. jar files directly cannot be deployed to WebLogic. Alright. Now, deployment of vars and ERs depends on what is called a deployment descriptor. We'll come to that descriptor just in a couple of moments. Alright. This is the structure. I'm going to take a sample application, then I'll show you, the jars, vars related to this sample application. We're going to see the structure of those applications, and also we're going to deploy those applications to our own domain. Now this medrec sample comes along with WebLogic. So you have, when you install WebLogic, you actually got medrec also installed. If you did a complete installation, you will actually get the medrec sample application also. So all that we have to do is go to the domain home of this medrec application, alright, and then take the jars, vars, ERs, whatever that is related to this medrec application from the domain and use it any way you want. So that's what is being done here. This is the location of the medrec. Wherever you have installed WebLogic, under there, samples, domains, medrec. So let me just go to that location, start the medrec server, and then I'm going to explain to you what the medrec application does. So let's first go to this location, start the medrec server, just like we start any other WebLogic server. So we're going to get into this location, WL home, samples, domains, medrec. So let's get in there. CD students, WebLogic online, Oracle, middleware, WL home. This is WL home. This entire path, WL server underscore 10.3. This is always WL home. Under here, samples. There is no samples here. It didn't get installed. Samples, domains, medrec. I did not select samples. Okay. Let's install silent in that case. Let's get into silent installation. We're going to use other installation that we have. Silent, WL home. Here also there is no samples. I'm going to run a find command to get the medrec. So I'm searching in the current directory and all the inside directories for a name called medrec, and it's a directory. Type of this archive or type of this artifact is directory. It's not there. I'm going to need that application for deployment. in your directory is there. Okay, if that's the case, we can actually deploy Oracle. Let me install it quickly. This is nice. JDK 160 bin java -jar wls -mode equal to console. I'm doing a quick install. Kishore, your directory is on the cloud server? Students, Kishore Oracle, okay. This is here. That's weird. Samples, domains, metric. Yeah, let's use it. No harm. So I'm going to exit my own and then use Kishore's samples here. Anything is okay. So here I'm basically under WL home. This is WL home. Alright. Then samples, domains, metric. So we are basically under metric home. The metric home pretty much looks similar to any other home. You have config directory, you have bin directory, alright, you have servers, you have security. Now if you go into config directory, you will be able to see the config.xml. Alright, we will see that directly from console. So first I'm going to start this server using a regular method. Alright, so get into bin directory, use start WebLogic to start the server. If you see this one, the name of this server is Medrec server. You'll find it here. It's coming up. Let it come up. Okay, it's up. Now if you see here, look at this one. The name of the server is this. WebLogic.name equal to Medrec server. You can actually do a ps-ef and see that server running. So if you see this one, this is a Medrec server. Where is the name of the server? This is the name of the server, Medrec server. Alright. Now this is a single server domain. If you see a Medrec server domain, it basically has, this is the kind of structure it has. You have a box, alright. So it's running on 127.0.0.1. This is where the box, it uses a loopback address. Then the domain has only one server. Alright, the name of the server is Medrec server. Medrec server, or let's say Medrec server. It runs on a port number 7011. right? And there is an application, Medrec application deployed to it. Everything here is Medrec, and this is the application we are trying to grab. And the name of the domain itself is Medrec. So if I take, for example, this, the name of the domain itself is Medrec. If we take that as the name of the domain, so the name of the domain is Medrec. So we have a box, the blue box, that's our machine 127.0.0.1. On that there is a domain called Medrec domain. There is only one server called Medrec server, it's running on 7.0.1.1, and there is an application called Medrec application deployed to it. We will see what that application is and purpose of that application in few moments. Now that we have started the server, if you see this one, it's running on 7.0.1.1 of our lesson address. You have both 127.0.0.1. This is a SSL port, it listens on multiple ports. So you got 127.0.0.1 with 7001, 127.0.0.1 7000, 7012. That's SSL port. We're going to talk about SSL ports later. So I'm going to access the admin console of this Medrec domain using this IP port. I want to use this IP port to access the admin console, just like any other admin console. All that we need is admin's IP port. This is Medrec's admin console. So the username password for Medrec is WebLogic. It's documented in the documents. Oh. It's not working. Yes, hold on. I think it's WebLogic 1. WebLogic 1. Welcome one. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. Welcome one. Alright. So here, once you have this one, let's look at structure of this domain. We know that there is only one server, so going to servers, you have only one server. This is the admin server running on port number 7011. We are more interested in the deployments. This is where the application is. So going to deployments. These are the various deployments related to Medrec application. So this is how it would look like from a backend, from an administrator's perspective. It has 5 var files or EAR files together, 5 bundles you can say. The type of application, if you see browser starter, it's a web application. A web application usually is bundled into a var file. JSF and JSTL are libraries. They are also var files. We'll see the difference between a library and a web application shortly. The type of the application is var only for all the three. When then coming into Medrec and Physician, these two are enterprise applications, so they are basically ER files. So here, if you look at browser starter, click on it, you will see the file related to the var file. So there is a browser starter.var file related to browser starter in this location. So the same way, if you go into each of the applications that we have here, these are application names, and when we are clicking, we are trying to see the corresponding var file names. So JSF 1.2. Similarly, click on JSTL, you find JSTL. Then you got Medrec, you got medrec.ar. The same way, if you click on Physician, you got physician.ar. Right? So like that, each of these applications have a corresponding var or AR in this case. Now coming to the difference between web application and a library. If you see browser starter, JSF and JSTL, all of them have var files. But the difference between a web application and a library is, web application is an independent application. Library is a commonly used class by everybody else. So here I have JSF, which is a bundle. In this bundle there are a lot of classes. The classes are used by browser starter, Medrec, Physician, means they are shared. Ideally, what you have to do in such a case is, you need to put this JSF or the classes inside the JSF into all the 3 bundles, because all of them are using it. Browser starter is using, Medrec is using, Physician is using. You need to bundle them independently into each of them. Or the easier way is, bundle into a separate var file, deploy it as a library. That way the classes inside JSF can be used by browser starter, Medrec, Physician. Now why you want to do a separate thing as a library is for maintenance reasons. Let's say you want to change something in the library. When you want to change something in the library, alright, now if it is bundled into 3 different locations, you have to make your changes in all the 3 locations. That's going to be a nightmare. Instead, if you have only a single bundle representing that, then you have to make your changes only at one place. So that way a library basically allows easy maintenance. This library can be accessed by any other application that is deployed to the same JVM. Whereas the classes inside the individual archives, let's say Physician, it has some classes abc.class. The abc.class cannot be accessed by Medrec application. It's not possible. The JVM will not allow such access. So if we want outside classes to be accessible by other applications, these classes have to be libraries. So the difference between library and a web application is, library is a commonly used classes. Web application is an independent archive and a complete application in itself. So from Medrec application, these are the 5 archives, and this is the back-end view of Medrec. Similarly, front-end, the user looks at Medrec application in a different way. we don't really have to know what it is, but it's good to have a slight idea of what we are doing. Now, MedRec, it's medical records. That's what it is. It's basically an online hospital management system. It's a very good sample application from WebLogic for a long time. It shows all the features of MedRec, WebLogic. That's a very nice one. Now we know this is a single server domain. The name of the domain is MedRec. The name of the server is MedRec server. Now this is a front-end view of MedRec application. There are three modules. We're not talking about these modules. These are backend. So a front-end user is not going to worry about these things. This is for an administrator. So we will come back to these things in a moment. But just to get an idea of what this application is doing from a front-end perspective, it has online hospital management. Something like when you walk into a hospital, alright, anywhere, the first thing you do is you basically go to the help desk and you register yourself. Once the registration is done, basically, the admin gives you a token kind of thing. Alright, once you get the token kind of thing, then you basically go in and wait for the physician. Once you go into the physician, you talk to the physician, and then you basically get your medicines or your diagnosis or your prescription. So those are the three common things that happen, isn't it? So the first thing is the patient module, where you go in and register. Admin module is what allows you to approve, disapprove. Physician is the one who is giving you the prescription. So patient module has one activity called either you register, or if you are already registered, you log in. An admin module allows the admin staff of that hospital to log in, and they can approve or deny a registration request. That's the only thing that admins will do in this admin module in this application. They just simply, if all the information you have given is valid, they'll approve your registration request. That is done. Now once a registration is done, now the physician will be able to input all the diagnosis, all the patient history, everything onto the website or the application. So that you have the entire history of the diagnosis for the entire period. So that way physician will be able to check patient history. Also, sometimes you don't, if you are already getting diagnosis from a doctor, you don't really have to walk in to a physician always. Let's say every month you go out for a checkup. This month you are feeling good, so you just talk to the physician. The physician says just redo that whatever medications you are taking. So that's basically, the physician can put it onto the web application or website online itself. So these are the front end part. Now if you have to see the front end, let's say how you will access the front end. You'll be accessing the server 192.168.128.11 and the port number where it's running, and then MedRec. This is the context. This is how the hospital guys would access this application. Really? What happened? This is the error. Redirect execution begin. Refresh. This is console. Go into this application, go into testing. This is 403. This is a page that we are accessing. Yeah, now it's working. See, I think first time when you exit there is some kind of problem. This is a page we are accessing. So this is the front end view of the application that we are looking. Now if you have to actually use Medrak, you can click on start using Medrak. This is the three modules. There's a patient module with two activities, register, login. There's an administrator module with login and approve, disapprove these registrations. Then there is a physician module who can log in and give all the prescription. This will be used by three categories of hospital and the hospital itself. Now that's what that's to limit of extent of information that we want from a front end. We're not really interested in the front end. If we see that this page is loading, we are good to go. Now what we are more interested is in the back end, especially in the deployments. We want to know how these things need to be deployed, in what order they need to be deployed, what happens during the deployment, what to do when there is a problem with the deployment. That's what we want to do. So for that, before we go into deployment, I need to take these applications into a separate location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste these locations. I'll go into each of these locations, copy paste these locations, and take the WAR files, jar files into a common location, because all these are at different locations. Now to make it easy, instead of doing it from the console, I will do it from the config.xml. So here I'm going to get to the config.xml of Medrak domain. And then copy paste all those files into a common location. We'll serve samples, domains, Medrak. Get into config, do a less r on config.xml. I'm trying to get all the locations of the archives. So if you take, for example, say this one, this is where the application deployment is starting. At app deployment, this is a starting and ending tag of one application. Now you will see a source path in here. This is the source path, and I can see medrak.arr archive here, and this is the complete path. So like that, I have physician, browser starter, JSF, JSTL. This is browser starter. This is physician. I'm sure I have JSM and JSTL also. This is JSF top, and this one is JSTL. Alright, so I'm going to do a grep ER from config.xml. So I have two ER files. One is this, other one is this. So I'm going to copy these two files into a common location. So I will create a directory. Let me open another session. Students WebLogic Online. Okay, this should be good. So I'm going to create a directory here, mkdir, let's say deploy files. So into this directory I'm going to put everything. So this is where all my files are going to be. It's like I got all the files from developer and I put it into this directory. So I'm going to do a copy all these files into this directory. Copy medrak.ar into this directory. Copy file 1 to directory. That's what I'm doing. Copy. Same way, copy the second file. Insert into the same directory. Alright. Two ER files are copied. Now I'm going to copy the WAR files. So first find the location of the WAR files, then copy those WAR files. is the var file. This one, browser starter, deploy files, copy. After browser starts, it's going to be JSF. Copy it. Then finally JSTL. Copy it. It's overwriting here, so we have copied all the files. It should be here. Yeah, you got all the files here. So these are the files that you got from the developer: JSF, JSTL, Medrec, Physician, and browser starter. These are the files that you need to deploy. But before we go into deployment, we want to quickly look at one of these var files to understand the structure. So I will extract this var file into a temporary directory. So I'm going to create a temporary directory, mkdir temp, copy the browser starter into temp directory, cd to the temp directory, extract this one. For extracting a var file, you're going to use a jar command with xvf options. The file name jar not found. Let's use the jar command. We have a jar command in our JDK, so I'm going to use the jar command inside this JDK. So set deploy files temp. So I'll use a jar in here, JDK 1.6 bin jar. That's a command I'm going to use with xvf browser start. So this is extracted. Now when you look at the structure of this var file, this is important. You got a file called webinf directory, then you got a directory called metainf. In the metainf there is a manifest.mf file, and in the webinf you got a web.xml file. Now this is the most important file that we are interested in. And if you actually see this one, this archive has a lot of directories in it: class, com, ba, medrec, util, and there is one class file. This is the compiled code. This is actually of Java, so we're not much interested in this entire part that's selected. What we are interested in is that web.xml file. Now let's have a look at web.xml file. A web.xml is in webinf, so get into webinf. This is what we are interested in. Do a cat on it just to view the contents. This is a web.xml. If you say this is the called context root, and this is what we have used to access the Medrec application here. If you looked at this one, we have used the Medrec application or the URL. This URL is actually defined in the web.xml, and also it defines the class, which is this. This is a class that is bundled and it's defined here. So the web.xml, if you observe, is basically giving certain information about how to access the application and information about what is actually bundled in this archive. Now let's say there are 100 classes that are supposed to be in this archive. Now all the 100 classes will be listed in web.xml. And when we are trying to deploy this browser starter file onto the JVM or of our one of the WebLogic servers, the WebLogic server, the first thing it does is it looks at the web.xml. Why it looks at the web.xml? It tries to find out whether all the classes defined in this web.xml are actually bundled or not. It's possible, let's say you have defined a class here, but you forgot to bundle it into the archive. So the first thing your WebLogic server is going to do is see whether the archive is proper or not. So it basically looks at a web.xml file and tries to find out whether everything defined in this web.xml is actually available or present or not in the archive. and also it tells you how to access the application, which is called a context root. So that way a web.xml helps in deploying an archive. For that reason a web.xml is called a deployment descriptor. A deployment descriptor. It describes the process of deployment. So let me quickly go back. See this one. This is what we are talking about. A deployment descriptor. For a var file, you have a deployment descriptor under web.inf folder. The name of the deployment descriptor is web.xml. The same way you have a manifest.mf file, usually that will have the version number. So for example, for this one, if you take our manifest.mf file will be under meta.nf. So you take meta.nf, the manifest.mf file, get it. This will have a version number 1.0. Same way you can, this is manifest version. There will be another tag called application version. That actually defines an application version. But usually manifest.mf is for version. Web.xml is a deployment descriptor that will help in deployment. Apart from these two files, you might sometimes optionally have a weblogic.xml. This is also called a deployment descriptor for a var file. The difference between web.xml and weblogic.xml is, if you see any Java program, you should have web.xml. That's a mandatory deployment descriptor, because when you develop a Java program or when you bundle it into an archive, you should tell somewhere that what are the contents of this archive. It's like an index. So the index is web.xml. It shows you what are the contents of the archive. Now once you've developed a Java application that can be deployed to any app server that we know, we can deploy it to WebLogic, we can deploy it to WebSphere, you have got JBoss, Glassfish, any of these app servers you can deploy this application to. Now if you are using certain features of that application server, now the features related to the app server can be put into another deployment descriptor. Now if it is WebLogic, you got weblogic.xml. If you are trying to deploy it to JBoss, it's going to be jboss.xml. The same way, probably if you deploy it to WebSphere, you will have a websphere.xml. So a var file can have two deployment descriptors. One is web.xml, other one is weblogic.xml. Now out of these two, which is mandatory and which is optional? Anybody? Which is mandatory deployment descriptor, which is optional one? That's correct. Web.xml is a mandatory one because every Java program should have a deployment descriptor, and that's web.xml. And whereas weblogic.xml is optional. Now just like var file, now if you have an EAR file and if you extract it, the directory structure is slightly different when it comes to deployment descriptor. You will still have manifest.mf with the same purpose, but the deployment descriptor will be in app.inf and the name of the deployment descriptor is application.xml. Earlier it is web.xml, now it's application.xml. The similar way, a WebLogic specific deployment descriptor is weblogic.xml, and here weblogic-application.xml. Now these are the deployment descriptors for vars and ERs. The same way, if you have a rar, you might have ra.xml and weblogic-ra.xml. You can actually see all types of deployment descriptors in that, the content that I have uploaded to the server for today's activities. So you got vars and ERs. Who will create? This will be created. These are part of the var files, isn't it? So a var file comes to you from a developer. Now even developers won't create anything. Basically they use the tool, Eclipse kind of tool. When you say archive this program, the tool will actually create a web.xml and it bundles inside the var. Now the reason why we are talking is Sometimes during deployment you come across problems like class not found. When you come across a problem class not found, you need to look in the web.xml and make sure that class is defined in web.xml and it's available in the archive. So it's possible that during archiving or during bundling, it's possible that some of the classes have missed and your WebLogic server is complaining about those classes. Those are deployment stage problems. When you're trying to deploy an application, come across that problem. When you come across the problem, all that you have to do is extract that WAR file that you got, just like just now we did. After extraction, look at the web.xml, see if you are see information related to the error you are getting, and you will get these questions in interviews. Deployment descriptor. Other than that, we don't do really anything, and it comes to us from you know the developer inside the WAR file. So the purpose of the deployment descriptor, as I was telling you, it describes the contents of a Java archive. Now, whatever are the contents in the archive or in that web.xml, the same order they will be loaded into the JVM. Means if you have 100 classes in an archive, A.class, B.class, C.class, like that, if they are defined in the same order in web.xml, A.class will be loaded first into the JVM, then B.class, then C.class. So whatever order the classes are defined in the web.xml, the same order they will be loaded into the JVM. Alright, so these are the two things a deployment descriptor does. It tells you the contents of archive, and it tells you in what order those contents should be loaded into the JVM. Alright, so now we know the basics of Java. So we know what a .java program is, when you compile the .java program using a Java C compiler. Alright, then you would get a .class file which is called a bytecode. Once you have the bytecode, you can run the bytecode on a JVM. Alright, now the bytecode that you are looking at here could be a simple class, or it could be a bundle of classes. When you bundle a lot of classes together, you will get different types of archives depending on what type of technology is used to write that class. An enterprise application usually have a front end and a back end. A front end is usually written using JSPs and servlets. A back end is usually EC-based. If you have JSPs and servlets, you get a WAR file, you got EC-based, you got a jar file. You combine these two things together, you got an EAR file, which is an enterprise archive. Then the deployment descriptors for VARs is web.xml and weblogic.xml. The deployment descriptors for EAR is application.xml and weblogic-application.xml. Alright, these are the fundamentals, non-weblogic related stuff, but important. So now I have been given certain vars and jars by the developer, and I've been asked to put it onto the infrastructure that I have created earlier. My infrastructure is, I have two boxes. On one box, admin and two managed servers are there. On the second box, another two managed servers are there. I was asked to put these 5 var files onto those 4 managed servers, let's say. Now how I'm going to do that? Now to do that, I have a lot of ways of doing it. I have a lot of tools. We can do it from the admin console, or we can use numerous command line tools. Out of all those things, the popular ones are weblogic.deployer. You can ant scripts, or you can use WLST scripts. You can actually use any of these 4 tools to deploy WebLogic. Or var files, ER files, star files, any of the files, you can use any of these tools to deploy. Now the first one is a GUI based tool, console. The 3 are command line. So you will use command line tool depending on comfortableness or how the developers are working. We'll come to those things anyway. Now, but the process is same on all the four tools, whether you use console or whether you use Java WebLogic.deployer and WLST, the process remains same. Now all these tools will connect to the admin server, and admin server is the one that does the deployment for you. Admin server validates your archive. It basically communicates with the managed servers. It tries to put your application onto those managed servers. So the admin is the one that does the deployment, and these are the tools to talk to admin. Now I'm going to start with admin console. We will be doing a couple of other things also. WebLogic.deployer, I think we will do. The rest of the two things probably Ant also will quickly do it. WLST you will know when we talk about WLST. It's simple, it's not that difficult. So once you know one, you know pretty much anything. So when we do admin console based deployment, I'm going to show you, or I'm going to tell you what actually happens during deployment. So let's look at the steps. So now you got 5 applications into this location. I'm going to remove that temporary directory. So I have 5 applications given from the developer. Now if I am not told about the order in which they should be deployed, I can pick up any application randomly, start doing the deployment. But in this case, in the case of Medrec application, it's required that the libraries be deployed first. So usually if you have libraries in any application, they will go first. So for this application, the order is something like this: JSF, GSTL, Medrec, Physician, and finally goes the browser starter. So that's something that the developer is going to tell you. So otherwise you can actually pick up in any order you want. So JSF is the first one, GSTL is the next one, Medrec, Physician, and browser starter. These are the 5 applications that you have to deploy in this order. And 1.2.war -1.2.1, and this information will come to you from the developer. The developer is going to tell you deploy these 2 things as libraries, and in that order deploy the remaining 3 as regular applications in the same order that was given. So that will come to you in special instructions, usually called a deployment guide. It can be a simple text file, that's it, simple sentences. Now I'm going to start with JSF, alright, show you how things work or what happens during deployment. And we're going to use the admin console tool first thing, alright. So we know our application is in this location, home and code IT students WL online deploy files. So let's go to the console. Okay, now before we go to console, we have to start our server. So because we are trying to deploy it onto our own domain, so I'm going to start our servers quickly. Oracle middleware user project, domains, and code domain, bin start admin.sh. So the admin is running. This is the IP port where it's listening. So now we already have Medrec application on it. Usually you will not be able to open 2 consoles on the same browser at a time. So usually one of them will go out. So I'm going to use WLS admin 123. Close this, close this. Right. So this is our domain. We go into servers. I have only admin running. Alright. None of my managed servers are running. You can actually complete the deployment without having any of the managed servers up and run. Alright. It's the admin server that validates the deployment. Managed servers simply take the files. So you don't really need the managed servers to be available when you're doing the deployment. Even if they are up, it's pretty okay. Honestly, there is nothing wrong even if they are up. So I'm going to go into deployments, click on the deployments. Now lock and edit. Alright, now install. This is your deploy. Go to the location where you have your file. Alright, so we have our deploy files under home and code IT students WL online. Click on here. Deploy files. These are our files. To choose the JSF, because we know that's what we've been told. It's an application or a library. So we're going to be told by the developer whether something has to be deployed as an application or a library. The difference between app and library that we talked about, library is basically shared classes among the applications, whereas application is an independent module. So applications are usually accessible to the end user. Libraries are not accessible to the end user. Libraries are for the purpose of other applications. So here, for example, if we take JSF and JSTL, where are they? Students WL online. For example, if you think JSF and JSTL are the libraries used by the other applications, whereas the other applications are accessible to the end user. So you select install as a library, move on to next. Now the targets, available targets, because the JSF-1.2.var file that you are deploying, you need to tell which JVMs are going to host it. Now normally we deploy the application to all the JVMs except the admin. We don't deploy anything to the admin because you want to keep the admin lightweight so that it does not go down. So select all the targets, move on to next. You basically given all the mandatory settings. So if you have to recollect, we're going to use these parameters. You did an install. After install, you said application or a library. After that, you selected targets. That's it. Your mandatory components, mandatory inputs are done. You said deploy application or a library to these targets. The rest of the parameters you are seeing are optional parameters. You can give generally the name. Usually you don't have to change the name. It will pick up the name of the archive as the name of the application. Now these version numbers, they are actually coming from the manifest.mf file of this JSF var file. Security related. Whatever is defined in the deployment descriptor, use those security. Sometimes, very rarely, you may use custom roles and policies. Alright. So but otherwise DD is the only way you always implement security, whatever is defined in deployment descriptor. Then here there is a slight a point. Source availability. Our source is deploy our JSF 1.2.var file. That's the actual var file that we are trying to deploy. And we have selected 4 targets. Now the question is, how we are going to make that var file available to these 4 targets? That's what is source accessibility. You said JSF 1.2.var file is there, but you have selected 4 servers. Out of those 4 servers, 2 are on one box, the other 2 are on a different box, isn't it? Now if the other 2 have to access this var file, how they're going to do that? There you have multiple ways of selecting. You can say use the same copy, everybody access it. In that case, you should make that copy available to everybody. In that case, box 1 and box 2 in our case, let's say here, this is box 1, this is box 2. You are saying a JSF 1.2.var should be accessible to this box and this box, which means the hard disk should be a shared hard disk. This managed servers should be able to see the JSF var file. These 2 managed servers should also be able to see the JSF var file in the same location. That is called a no stage mode. Means you are keeping a single copy. Everybody will access it through using a common storage or a shared disk. It's called a no stage mode. So you have a single copy. Single copy. That's no stage. Now this is good, or having individual copies for all the managed servers is good? Which one do you think is the way to go, which is good for production? One copy for everybody, each one of the 4 managed servers having their own copies, because we are targeting it to the 4 managed servers. What do we want? We want one copy being shared across all the 4, or we want to have each of them having their own copies? This is a better architecture. Its own copy. And why? Why is that own copy is recommended? That's correct. That's correct. If we lose the one that you are sharing across all the managed servers, then you pretty much lost everything. Then there is no point in creating this fancy architecture at all. So you want to minimize the impact, so that the only way you can minimize the impact is by having redundancy. This is a common principle followed across everywhere in IT. You need minimal impact, have a backup. Nothing but that's redundancy. So here we want each of these targets or each of these managed servers to have their own individual copy. Now the having your own individual copy is called, so you have individual copies now. You can have a single copy, which is called no stage, or you can have individual copies. If you have an individual copy, now somebody has to make that copy, isn't it? Now that if you ask admin server making copy, that is called stage mode. And if you want to make a copy, administrator, means you will execute a copy command that will take, or scp command that will take that var file just now we are doing into the corresponding location. It's called external stage. Somebody external is staging that archives. So here no stage mode is one copy shared across all. Stage or external stage is individual copy. Even in this individual copies, if you say stage mode, the admin server will make a copy for you. If you say external stage, you're going to do the copy. Normally you will use external stage when there is no way to transfer the file from one location to the other location by the admin. Sometimes we usually prevent that kind of transfer. Heavy file transfers can be prevented using HTTP protocol. Or if you have a very small bandwidth kind of issues, you will use external stage because we transfer it manually. Otherwise, staging mode is the most preferred one, and this is the default mode in 11G. In 10G of WebLogic, it was no stage. So in 10G, if you don't select anything, you have only one copy shared across all the servers. In 11G onwards, if you don't select anything, the admin practically copies your var file into each of the server's directory. Now, where does it copy? See this one. Use the defaults or copy this into every target for me. This is a stage mode. Or else you can say, I will make this deployment accessible from the following location, which is actually no stage. This is the location from which it will be accessible. The default one is, or the preferred one is usually, you can explicitly select copy this one, alright, in which case the var file will be copied to individual targets. Now when I say individual targets, it goes into this directory. So if you say domains and code daemon, right, it goes into server's location, because we know this is a location where all the servers have their independent directories. Now inside these directories, let's say here we have selected mng1 as a target. Inside this you will see a new directory called stays. After we deploy it, the stays directory will actually hold the var file. Now if you selected stays mode, the new directory gets created, and when the server is coming up, it will pull all the var files archives from admin and stores it into that directory. So let's go ahead and complete that. So copy this application, which is stays mode, move on to next. This is the summary page. Review your choices and click finish. So here, this is the summary. Deployment, this is the file, this is the name of the file. Copy it to all targets for me. Whatever is in deployment descriptor, that's my security model. And these are the targets. The targets are all the 4 servers. None of these 4 are up. None of these 4 is up. Remember that one. Finish it. So now when you said finish, what is happening now? What is the admin server doing? When I said finish, the admin server, what is it doing? It basically extracts the var file that you have given. After it extracted the var file, it looked at the deployment descriptor, which is web.xml. In the web.xml, it found out all the classes that are supposed to be there in the bundle. So the entire list will be validated whether those files are actually bundled or not. Once they are bundled, WebLogic admin server will create certain internal objects. Now those internal objects will be pumped to the managed servers at a later point. So these are the 2 things it's doing. One is it's validating the archive. Second thing, it's creating all the internal bindings and artifacts. Now if both those steps are done, the admin server is going to show you the screen that you are seeing. It says basically your deployment is successful. Now once that's done, you can activate the changes. So your deployment is practically done. Now if you go into deployments tab, this is application. And the state, if you say, it's new state, which means the deployment is successful, but the targets are not available. And how do you see the targets of this application? You click on the application, you go into targets. These are the targets. You can change the targets at any point of time you want. So now my application state is new. If I start at least one target out of the 4, the application state will change from new to active. So I'm going to start manage server 1 just to change the state of my application too. active. So this is 7011. Okay. Let's start the manage server. Start mng1.sh tailfnf mng1.log. Okay, your manage server 1 is up. Now once the target is up, let's go back and see the state of the application. No, refresh it. See this one? This has become active. And this is the state you want all your applications to be if they are they need to be accessible by the end user. The state of the applications that so far you've seen is one is new, other one is active. And there you will see a couple of other states, but every application has to be in active state, otherwise it's not accessible to the end user. New state is you have deployment successful but targets not available. Active state is deployment successful, at least one target available. Now that's your deployment of one application. Now you have 4 more archives. We're going to do it quickly for the 4 more. So JSTL now. This is a library. Move on to next. Select the targets. Next. All these options, we're not going to change anything at all except the last one, which is stage mode. On to next. Finish it. So if you recollect, you're saying install application or library, targets, then probably you're giving a name, then security you're not touching anything, then you're doing stage mode. Those are the 5 inputs we're giving. Remember these inputs, the same inputs we'll be giving for any of the tools, command line tools. We'll be giving the same inputs for all the command line tools also. So this is deployed, activate the changes. The same way deploy the third one. Open edit, install Medrec. Next. Next. Copy it everywhere. Next. Finish. Now while this is going on, let's go to that manage server 1. Because this server is started, we have selected stage mode, isn't it? So the stage directory should have been created by now. So go into server's location, server name, stage directory. See this thing? This is where the application gets copied to. So each of the applications has its own directory, JSF has its own, and here we have that WAR file. This was copied to this location by the admin server. Alright, like that, all the servers will have this stage directory. Alright, Under stage directory, each of the applications will have its own directory. Then the corresponding WAR file will be copied here. So now activate the changes again for the third archive. And deployments, log and edit. Yeah, by the way, see this one? This is a third type of application state, prepared, which means it's deployed but not ready to serve the request. You have to move this from prepared state to active state by selecting this and starting the application. Start serving all requests. So when you do this start application will move from prepared to active state. This happens sometimes. Yes. So now it's an active state. You'll get a warning here. That's okay. This is a known problem with Metric application. The warning symbol is okay here. But otherwise, in your real time, if you get a warning like this, you should see why you are getting a warning. Alright, you should check the log files and see why there is a warning. The same way, move on to next. Let's say install. After Metric, it's Physician. Get into Physician. Now, you see this one, there is a third option available here. I think even for earlier one it's available. Install this deployment as an application but target components individual. Now usually this you will see for EAR file. The reason you will see it is for EAR is we know EAR is a combination of vars and jars. So here let's say you got an EAR file. Alright. If that EAR has var files, var1 and var2, you can target var1 to manage over 1, var2 to manage over 2. That's possible. And that's what this option represents. So if you have an EAR file and there are multiple vars, target var1 to a different manage server, target 2 to a different manage server. Now that's usually not done. You usually bundle a var file or an EAR file separately and give it in that case. Unless the application is too big, you don't do that kind of separate targeting. Usually it's the entire application being deployed as a single unit to the JVM. So select that one, move on next, select the targets, next, everything same, stage mode, next, finish it. Right. Activate the change. Right. The same way, the last one. This is also in prepared, so we'll come back to that one. Install browser starter final. Next, targets. Next, stage, next, finish. Right. Activate the changes. Go into deployments, make sure everything is in active state, so these two are still in prepared, so move them to active. Select, start serving all the requests. Yes, they are active. So all your applications are now active. Now you should be able to access your Metric application on all the targets that are available. For now, MNG1 is available. You can actually start the other managed servers on this box. So this is which server it is. This is 701. We don't want this. Let's start MNG1 too, or MNG2. Start MNG2. Switch. tail-f MNG2. Log file. So the MNG2 is coming up. In the meantime, you can actually access MNG1. So go into deployments, You got browser starter, targets. This is the target. Go into testing. Alright. This is available already. 2010. This is MNG1. You can click this one. This is not coming up. Or else the actual context root that we have defined. Now sometimes whatever you have in test will not work. So this is one way of finding out what's the test base, but it's not necessary it will work always. So the one that we are doing is we are picking up from the web.xml. This is your managed server port number. Alright. This is the context URL defined in web.xml. Enter. You got the base. Start using MyDrac. You got the first base. And this is available on your MyDrac, not on MyDrac domain, but on your own encode domain. So like that, if you start the other managed server, the other managed server should also give you a base. This is the second managed server coming up. Okay, this is the second managed server up. What's the port number it's running on? 2020. So we can use the 2020 port number. Alright, with MyDrac. Enter. The page is accessible. Click on start using MyDrac. The page is available. So this page is enough. We don't want to get inside and actually check everything. Probably it's not going to work because a lot of backend resources are not available. So here what you have done is you have taken an application from one domain. You have deployed the same application to a domain with multiple servers. Now this application is accessible on all these two. So the same way, if you start third and fourth servers, you will be able to access it on the corresponding ports also. Alright, so that's your deployment, and what happens during deployment. And we have done this deployment using admin console. Now the same deployment can be done using WebLogic.deployer or ant or WLST. We will see a couple of them. But before we go in there's an important thing. Now that you have deployed this application, let's say this is version 1. When you get version 2 of the same application, you have to undeploy the existing one, then deploy the second one. Now when you are doing a undeploying, a theoretical way is to go to that deployments, this thing, you select it, you simply stop the application. Alright, let's say you force stop it now. It goes into prepared. Now you can select and delete it. Lock and edit, select and delete it. So that's a theoretical undeployment. But the problem with the theoretical undeployment is, even if you removed it from the domain configuration, which means from the config.xml, the files related to this browser starter will still be there in the stays and cache and temp. So here if you say on MNG1 we tried to remove the application. Servers encode MNG1. You have cache and temp folder, which will still have files related to your browser starter. Similarly, sometimes even the stays folder will have, it's removed now, but sometimes you will still be left with the browser starter directory and the corresponding WAR file. Now if you have these files, this is the other two directories are cache and temp, these two. Now if you have these two directories and there are files related to the undeployed application in these two directories, so you have certain traces of version 1 still existing. Now you are trying to deploy version 2. When you do that, sometimes it happens the files that still exist will not be overwritten, they still remain. if they do remain, you might see certain properties of the old version still lying around. So sometimes you will see after doing the deployment of version 2, your testers will complain, we are still seeing the old version properties. For example, let's say version 1 was red in color and version 2 the interface is in green in color. The page they are opening is green in color in version 2. Version 1 that we have just now deployed has a red color. Now when they are doing the testing, not every page but some pages will be still in the old version red color. So they're going to complain, oh, some of the pages are still in red color. Now they're going to blame us for saying, oh, you guys did not deploy it properly. You guys did not deploy it properly. Now it's possible that the developer by mistake put the old files. It's a possibility. But the first thing that comes to anybody's mind is probably it was not deployed properly. Now to make sure that the deployment, even we are not sure, probably we made a mistake, we don't know. So as an administrator, when you deploy a second version which was already existing, you will make sure every trace of that old application is gone. And to do that, what you do is you remove it from the console. You also remove it from these directories here. Means you're going to remove stage directory, temp directory, and cache directory. By doing that, you are 200% sure that no trace of version 1 exists in your environment. Now once you have removed it, then you can deploy version 2 of the application. Restart the server. When you restart the server, these directories they get created again. So in real time, your undeployment and deployment, it's not simply from a console or a tool. You undeploy from console, you remove that files, then you deploy the application. Now removing those files is called clearing the cache or purging the cache. So if you see the actual steps you follow in real time about deployment, this is what you will do. Now you need to clear the cache, but obviously when you have to clear the cache, you cannot do it when the servers are running. So you need to stop the application, delete the application. That's what we did now. After you do that, you have to stop the domain because you're going to remove the cache and temp directories later, because you can't remove the directories if they are already in use by the server. So you will shut down the domain, then you clear the cache, then you start the admin server, you deploy the application using any of the tools. You can use console, deployer, and WLS. So in real time, it's not like simply like you select it and undeploy, then select it and deploy. It's not that simple, because when you do that, the old traces, it's possible that the old traces still remain. So what you do is, to make sure you don't come across a problem later, you delete it first, then you shut down the servers, then you clear the cache or purge the cache, then you start the admin server and then do the deployment. So these are the actual steps of deployment. Now this you will get in interviews, questions. How do you deploy? Now the common answer can be you can deploy it from console, but that's not the answer. The interviewer is not actually expecting you to answer that way, because anybody knows that you deploy it from console. There's nothing, there's no question in there. What the interviewer is expecting is, are you aware of a process called clearing the cache? Out of all these steps, this is the most important step. The interviewer is expecting that you tell about this thing. So that this is something that's done in every actual environment. So you stop and delete the application first. You shut down your servers, you clear your cache, then you start your servers, then do the deployment using one of the tools that you are saying. The one that you used is console. Same way we can use any of these tools. Alright, so we're going to stop it here for today. Tomorrow we're going to see weblogic.deployer, probably Ant also, and see how to do the deployment using these two tools. And there is a lot of theoretical discussion in deployment that you will come across. So we will see those things also in tomorrow's session. Alright, any questions? If you lose the shared disk, yes, you're gone. Yeah, yes, Pavitra. It's already uploaded. It's uploaded to the server. It's already there, I think. It's not that. Okay, I'll upload it. No problem. What else? Prasad, you said there's a problem. Let's do it quickly. So let me share it. I'm going to make you the presenter. Okay, let's do it quickly. You're sharing? Okay. You're working on the cloud. What's the port number you used?
7010.
Okay, and how you are accessing it from console? That's not going to work.
Okay.
You have to use 49204 with the port number. 192 is not going to work. That's internal to the server itself. Use that 49204 8988 with your port number.
Okay, tell me again.
49204,
Okay.
the cloud IP.
Okay. No.
Admin is running, right?
Yeah, running.
Okay, select so 49204.
Dots. Honey?
Yeah, are you typing? I
Oh,
can't see
yeah,
it.
running.
49204 8988 colon 7010 slash console.
Same. 49.204.89.88. Okay. Yes, got it.
Okay, right, carry on.